Welcome back to Monday Mod Tips. By request, today we're going to be covering the wiring of the Stampede and a brief overview of how exactly it works. Now, I mentioned in the comments of the Hyperfire that the Stampede is essentially the same as the firing mechanism of the Hyperfire. It does have one additional piece, which is this switch. So let's take a look at the components. Obviously, there is the battery housing. There is an on-off switch on the side of the blaster. Looks like a safety and basically functions like a safety. There is, of course, the switch and, of course, the motor. The Stampede is, of course, a fully automatic magazine-fed Springer, which makes it, I believe, unique amongst Nerf blasters. There may be one off-brand ones, but as far as I know, this is the only fully automatic magazine-fed Springer, which is really kind of neat. The way it works, of course, is it has a powerful motor that drives a gearbox, which actually forces the bolt forward, and then the catch releases and the blaster fires, and then it resets, and so on and so forth. And it also utilizes motor braking to ensure that every time you pull the trigger, it completes at least one full cycle, even if you've let go of the trigger. So we will take a look at how that works. It works using motor braking, so we will start with our variable circuit, which will be represented here in yellow. It comes off of the trigger switch COM and goes to the motor positive, as it does in pretty much every blaster that uses motor braking. The negative line then goes first from negative on the battery to negative on the motor, and from negative on the battery to normally closed on our switch. And that is the motor brake. So when the switch is not being pressed, there is negative going to both sides of the motor, and it therefore grounds and will stall, as is desired. The positive line goes from positive on the battery housing to the far side of this on-off switch, which is the safety on the side of the blaster, and then from that switch to the normally open on the trigger switch. And that is all there is to it. Now when you turn it on and pull the trigger, the motor spins, and as you can see, comes to a halt very quickly, which is lovely. Now, the way the motor braking ensures that the blaster always completes one cycle when you pull the trigger is similar to the rapid strike, but much simpler. When the bolt starts moving forward, it holds down the switch internally. So even though you let go of the trigger, the switch is still held until the bolt returns all the way back and releases this switch. Motor braking then kicks in and brings it to a halt, which is important because if the motor were to slowly spin down, the bolt would continue forward just enough to re-engage the switch, and the blaster will never stop firing, which is not a good thing. If you increase the voltage a great deal, you will need to increase other things, some of like the return spring and possibly the switch spring, to ensure that the motor braking is still enough to stop it. So keep that in mind. If you're having trouble with what is called runaway, that's probably that you've overvolted it and not increased the right springs enough. Other issues that people will run into is they will forget the negative circuit to the motor, so it doesn't actually have motor braking, and so it will not stop firing. So hopefully this explains the more common issues you might run into. Now, the stock version does, of course, have 3 additional locks built in. 2 on the magazine, which is an odd redundancy, and 1 on the jam door. And the ones on the magazine I always take out because they're completely pointless, in my opinion, because it prevents you from dry firing the blaster when you don't have a magazine in it, but doesn't prevent you from dry firing the blaster if you have an empty magazine in it. So it really isn't doing you much good. The jam door, on the other hand, does serve the purpose of keeping you from, catching your finger in the bolt if you were to have the jam door open and fiddling with it and you pull the trigger and it would cycle with your hand in there. That could be very unpleasant. Less likely to do you any real harm, but it could end up shearing the gears in your gearbox, which would be a catastrophic failure. So there you go. That's all of the basics on the Stampede. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and put them in the comment section. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for watching.